All right, everyone. 1:32, so let's get started. I think there's just one or two people haven't joined us yet. Just as a reminder, we are recording this webinar, right, along with the PDF of the slides will be available on our website next week. Today's workshop should last about an hour or so. So my name is Glenn Saponis. I'd like to welcome you and also congratulate you on receiving a 2024 grant from the Historic Trust. Just as a quick update, the legislation for these grants has passed both houses in the legislature. We're just waiting now for the governor to sign that legislation so that we could start doing grant agreements. So I'm expecting that. Well, I was expecting it already, but I'm expecting it any time now. So it should be soon. Next slide, please. So, as a reminder, the mission of the trust is to advance historic preservation in New Jersey for the benefit of future generations through education, stewardship, and what you guys are receiving today, financial investment programs that save our heritage and strengthen our communities. Our funding, which is the Preserve New Jersey Fund, is from a percentage of the corporate business tax, the CBT, along with funding for green acres, blue acres, and farmland preservation. Next slide, please. So the Historic Trust is an in but not of agency of government. While we are located and are supported by the Department of Community Affairs, we actually have our own board of trustees, which basically govern our programs. The board is comprised of 12 citizen members nominated by the governor and three ex officio members, which represent Department of Environmental Protection, Community Affairs, as well as Department of Treasury. Next, please. So our current staff is here before you. You're going to hear from many of them today. All their contact information is located on our website, and you'll see more of that as the presentation moves on. So I guess, once again, congratulations on receiving your grant. We look forward to working with you as your projects progress. And now I will turn it over to Tara, who will be going through today's agenda. Tara?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Tara. I'm a new preservation specialist here at the Trust, so I'm very excited to be going through this grant round with all of you. To start us off today, I'll be giving an overview of what we'll discuss. So just to reiterate that this is a webinar, which means that the staff cannot see you or hear you as attendees. To communicate with us, we have access to a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Any questions you have can be typed into that designated section. We'll address any questions that are entered at the end of each section. As well as at the end of the webinar, we'll have a final Q&A section. We'll be able to answer these questions verbally or directly in the Q&A function. Also, just to note that this presentation will be recorded and available on our website next week. So that you can follow along, here is an agenda for today. First, I'm going to briefly go over the grant agreement process, the grantee info packet, and grant manual materials. Then the rest of the trust staff will discuss how we execute the grant agreements, how we define the scope of work, archaeological requirements if those are applicable to your project, how to administer an active grant, how you close out a grant, and project publicity. As previously mentioned, there will be time at the end of this presentation when you can ask any of your remaining questions. So the grant agreement process. The first step of the grantee process is to attend this workshop. So congratulations, everybody. You've completed the first step and you should be very proud of yourselves. We're happy to have all of you here today. Your next step as grantees is to submit any supporting documentation in relation to your project and your grantee info packet. After the trust receives that information, we'll assemble those materials and send you 2 original copies of a finalized grant agreement for signature. Once you sign that and follow the procedures laid out in the manual, you'll need to mail that back to us. We then send that upstairs to the fiscal office here at the Department of Community Affairs, and the grant agreement will be opened and executed. Once the agreement is executed and all reporting documents are submitted, signage is in place and the easement is in place if that is required for your project. The agreement is open and active, and then you'll be able to submit in for reimbursements. So grant materials and manual. There are 2 primary materials for you as grantees. The first is the grantee info packet, which you should have already received in an email from the New Jersey Historic Trust staff earlier this month. This is a crucial document in executing the grant agreement. We cannot move forward until this is fully completed and submitted to us, so please print that out, fill it out, and compile all certifications and resolutions and mail a physical copy to the trust by March 28th. We'll go further into detail about this and the info packet shortly. Additionally, we have the grant manual, which is a step-by-step guide outlining the grant agreement process and reiterating what we explain in this workshop today. Again, this is a really great resource. I find myself referring back to the grant manual a lot, so this will be really helpful for you as you go through the grant process, so please take advantage of it. So, resources for you. The manual is available along with other great resources on our webpage, www.njht.org. On our homepage, there will be a big resources tag at the top of the page, which you can see an example of on your screens. And if you drop that menu down, there is a specific for grantees section. If you click on that, there will be different breakdowns depending on your grant type and the subcategories with PDF documents of a number of different resources that will be very helpful for you throughout this process. Now I will be passing it off to Carrie, who will be discussing executing the grant agreement with you.
Carrie, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? I'm having a little bit of trouble with the sound going out. Let's try again. Sorry about that, everyone. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Carrie Hogan, and I'm the Trust's Fiscal Officer. Today I'll be covering the checklist of documents in your grantee info packet, which are needed to draft and execute your actual grant agreement. We also refer to this as just the info packet. So the quicker you get the documents and forms filled out and handed off to your program officer, or PO as we call them, the faster your grant agreement can be drafted and executed. Please note that the Trust, we can't process any reimbursement requests without a fully executed grant agreement. So following the steps is really important. Okay, so the first form in your grantee info packet is the checklist itself. This checklist and all the items on it need to be completed and returned to your PO as part of your initial grant agreement package. Please note that the checklist and documents are not your grant agreement. They are simply the essential forms that we use to draft your contract. After the checklist itself, the first item you need to provide is the letter of acceptance. The second page of the letter of acceptance needs to be filled out and signed. By signing the letter of acceptance, you are agreeing to abide by the regulations that govern this grant program, including the requirement to inform your program officer at the Trust of all new developments that pertain to your grant project. Your PO should receive copies of all documentation for review and approval before proceeding with any work. So next on the checklist is the information form, and this is a really important form. You have to have everything on there completed and have it as, 100% accurate. It is a simple form, but it's critical to how we compile the actual grant agreement. You can see there on number 3 on the info form is your vendor ID number. All grantees must be registered with NJ Start, and that's the state's mandatory procurement and payment system. Registration in NJ Start creates an account profile, so payments can be issued for your grant reimbursements. For those returning grantees, you're already in NJ Start, and you can continue using either your EIN or your vendor number to access or update your NJ Start profile page. But for brand new grantees that are 501c nonprofit organizations, all you have to do is submit a W-9 questionnaire to Treasury via the AAI, that email there, the AAI unit at treasury.gov. You can find the W-9 questionnaire PDF at the web address below there. It's all through Treasury. So what you do is you download it, you fill it out, and then you return it via email. And that's all you have to do. They'll go ahead and create your profile for you. When filling out this W-9, please make sure that you submit your organization's correct EIN and a good mailing address to which you'll receive your reimbursement checks. The contact person and address you provide should match the name and address on your grant agreement. Please note that county and municipal entities are already in the state's vendor system via their EIN number. However, you can still contact NJSTART just to confirm that the address and names are up to date. There is a helpline that you can see there, the help desk phone number for getting registered and checking on existing profiles. Please contact the help team directly with any questions. Also, just to note that you will have the option to sign up for ACH or automatic payments. These are electronic payments that deposit grant reimbursement funds directly into your organization's designated bank account. So instead of waiting for a paper check to come in the mail, your approved reimbursement moves automatically to your business account. And again, if you need any assistance setting this up, please email the Treasury folks at the contact listed here. Electing ACH can expedite payments by approximately 2 weeks, so it's worth looking into. Next item on your checklist is proof of insurance. All grantees must maintain insurance coverage for the entire term of the grant agreement. Grantees must provide a COI Accord certificate, seen here, to the trust. This is a standard document that insurance companies are very familiar with and can easily provide to you. So get in touch with your insurance company now and let them know that you need one. Usually they can provide it same day or within a few days. Please note that the New Jersey Historic Trust must be named as additionally insured in the lower left box of the accord. Please also include your project number on the certificate. This way we can match up any subsequent accord certificates to your project file. Grantees must submit a COI accord to the trust before the grant agreement can be executed. Missing or incomplete information will delay the process. So next we have the all-important Attachment E Governing Body Board Resolution. Your governing body or board needs to pass an official resolution certifying the amount of the grant that you have been awarded and identify by name the individual authorized to sign the grant agreement on your organization's behalf. The person named in Attachment E resolution must be the same individual who ultimately signs the grant agreement. The resolution must have original signatures of the person approving the resolution as well as the person attesting to the approval. Approved by and attested by should not be the same person. All resolutions should be certified with a government, corporate, or notary seal or stamp. If your board secretary doesn't have an official stamp, you must take your resolution to a notary for certification. And in fact, most nonprofits just go straight to the notary so that there's no question as to whether or not their approval signature is properly certified. Resolutions that are not properly certified will not be accepted, and this will delay completion of your grant agreement. Resolutions can take some time to set up, usually they're quarterly, so please get your resolution on your next governing board meeting agenda. Next is the Attachment G, Statement of Adequacy of Accounting System. This is for your CFO or treasurer. They must review the requirements of the grant agreement, including state-required audits and reporting, and then sign this form. By signing, your financial officer is agreeing to be responsible for establishing and maintaining the financial statements for your grant. Your CFO treasurer is also the same person who certifies reimbursement requests and signs all payment vouchers that are submitted to the state. Please note that your CFO treasurer that signs Attachment G that you see here cannot be the same person authorized by resolution to execute the grant agreement. This provides the necessary checks and balances of healthy accounting. So once you've completed all forms correctly, you will then surface mail your grantee info packet and all your documents to your program officer at the trust so that they can prepare your grant agreement. Remember, your grant agreement info packet and everything is due to the PO by March 28th. That's in 2 months, so it's going to come up quickly. Next, 2 copies of the grant agreement will be sent to you for signature and return. Upon return of both signed copies, Glenn Saponis, our executive director, will countersign them and then forward them to the Department of Community Affairs Fiscal Services. They also sign the grant agreements and establish an account for payment. Finally, 1 fully executed grant agreement is mailed back to you, and we keep 1 here at the trust. Make sure that you keep your copy of your grant agreement somewhere safe and easily accessible. It's a living document and should be used by the project contact and team as a guide for compliance, reporting, submitting reimbursement requests, and following mandatory audit guidelines. That's it. Do you have any questions? Not that I see.
Looks like we don't have any questions. Does anybody have any questions at this point? If you think of a question
think
later,
of them,
we
just
will
let me
also
know.
get to them at the end.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie, and I am a program officer here at the Trust, and I'll be taking us through defining the scope of work. So the main component of the grant agreement that deals with the scope of work is attachment D1. This form establishes the project that's being funded and the costs associated with each component of the project. The information included in the D1 is based off of the scope of work each of you submitted last spring when you originally applied for grant funding, unless changes were made by the trust during the application period. Over the next few weeks, program officers will start drafting the D1s and sending them to grantees for review to ensure that we have all the correct information. And once it's reviewed and okayed by the grantee and we have your completed info packet, we can begin formulating your grant agreement. Now I'll walk us through each component of the D1, which you can see a snapshot of here on the first page. Every D1 will have a heading including general information about the grant, such as the name of the grantee, the project name, the project number, and the grant award amount. The first section of the D1 is a brief history and statement of significance for the site, as well as a short description of the project being funded. The second section establishes the trust as the primary project review authority and describes the review requirements for the grants. Then the third section is where we specifically define the scope of work being funded by the grant. For capital D1s, the scope of work is separated into two components, non-construction and construction. Non-construction includes all the architectural and engineering services, as well as the bidding documents. The construction component is broken down by construction division and lists each element of the project scope of work. This breakdown allows both you as the grantee and the trust to clearly see everything included in your scope of work. So as mentioned previously, the scope of work is broken down by construction division. So we list out every division being covered in your scope, as well as the associated work items for each division. Costs are broken down into non-construction and construction, and it's important to keep in mind that your non-construction costs can't exceed 20% of your total project budget. So for example, if your project total is $150,000, we'd multiply that by 20% to find your maximum non-construction cost, which in that case would be $30,000. The costs for each division are taken from the project budget worksheet, as well as any proposals from consultants that you provided with your original application. If your project budget includes archaeology, those costs are considered to be part of your construction budget and should be listed under that section. We feel that separating it out this way helps encourage archaeology as an integral part of any capital project where there may be ground disturbing activities. If your project does include ground disturbing activities, there will be specific language pertaining to archaeology requirements added to the D1, and we do this to make sure you're aware of the trust archaeological requirements before moving forward. Our staff archaeologist Alexis will discuss more regarding our archaeological requirements later on in the presentation. The next major component of the D1 is the expenditure spreadsheet. This corresponds with the funded activities listed by construction division in the written section of the D1. As you can see from the screenshot of the expenditure sheet shown on the screen, it's broken down not only by non-construction and construction costs, but also by construction division. So for example, you can see some of the divisions are masonry, finishes, equipment, electrical, and so on. This document is meant to show both your proposed cost as well as any match expended you included in your application. At the bottom of the expenditure spreadsheet, you'll find a running total of your non-construction and construction costs added together, as well as the breakdown showing your grant award, your required match, and your actual match based on the proposed cost you provided us with. The ratio section will basically show either a 1-to-1 match for our CAP 2 grantees or a 3-to-2 match for our CAP 1 grantees. When completed, this sheet should be close to, if not identical to, the project budget worksheet you submitted with your application originally. It's also important to note that some of the amounts in each division may be adjusted slightly just to account for our programmatic requirements, such as temporary project signs, which is $500, and the permanent plaque, which is $200 for any capital grant over $50,000. So if some of the numbers are slightly off when you get this, it's most likely because we had to account for those expenses. They'll usually be added to Division 1 General. Additionally, non-construction costs may be adjusted to meet that 20% maximum requirement if it doesn't already. As with anything else in the D1, if you have any questions, please reach out to your program officer and they will be happy to discuss it with you. One of the most important things to note when it comes to the spreadsheet is that we do not hold you to the dollar amount for each individual division. They're essentially meant to be a guide for the project. So the final component of the D1 is the project schedule. These are important dates associated with your project, including the commencement date of your grant and the expiration date of your grant. I recommend keeping these on hand or posted somewhere you can see them so you're aware of your deadlines and can plan your funded work accordingly. And I'm going to go over the specific dates for our 2024 grant shortly, but for now, I'll be going over the general timeline. So the grant agreement itself must be executed within 18 months of the agreement commencement date. All work must begin within 24 months of the agreement commencement date. All work must be completed within 4 years of the commencement date. And finally, the grant agreement will expire 5 years from the commencement date. So as you can see on the screen, this is the project schedule for our 2024 capital grants. The schedule is based off of the day the governor signs the appropriation bill for these grants, which, as Glenn mentioned, in this case has not happened yet, but will happen this year sometime, and hopefully that'll be soon. The date that the bill is signed will be known as the agreement commencement date. For most of you, the date the bill is signed will also be considered the work period commencement date. And for those that started work prior to this date, we just ask that you let your program officer know that date that the work actually began so it can be reflected in your D1. From there, we have 18 months to execute the grant agreement. This is known as the agreement execution date and will be the date the bill is signed this year in 2026. We do recommend that you execute your agreement sooner rather than later. You can't receive your first reimbursement until the grant agreement is fully executed. You must begin work within 24-month period following the work period commencement date, and this is your project commencement deadline. For this grant round, that date will be the signature date in 2027. The funded project must be completed within 4 years of the agreement commencement date, so by the signature date in 2029, and the agreement itself will expire 5 years after the agreement commencement date on the signature date in 2030. And this allows you an extra year after the work is completed to close out the grant. Extensions on these grants are not assumed and are only advised in extenuating circumstances. They must be requested and then approved by our Grants and Loans Committee. So we encourage working closely with your consultant to ensure that you follow these deadlines and dates as closely as possible because it may be hard to get an extension if your agreement expires. An extension can't be guaranteed. These dates will appear in your D1 scope of work, so don't worry if you aren't able to jot them all down right this minute. So in addition to defining the scope of work, we also use the D1 to identify your project team. All consultants working on the grant-funded project must be approved by trust staff and must meet our professional qualification standards. If you include resumes and project proposals from consultants in your original application, they're considered approved unless you have been informed otherwise. If you didn't include consultants in your original application, you must submit resumes and project proposals to your program officer to have them approved by the trust before work can begin. If you're unsure if your project team is appropriate or if they've been approved by trust staff before, please contact your program officer. So the trust has project requirements for all funded work. All work must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. A large part of your program officer's job is to review the submitted work to ensure it meets these standards. Additionally, archaeology or consideration of archaeology is required for any project that involves ground disturbance. All projects will be reviewed for archaeological considerations before the D1 is finalized and the grant agreement can be executed. Finally, publicly owned resources may require project authorization from the Historic Preservation Office. This is very project specific, so please reach out to your program officer if you have any questions about that. And lastly, the state of New Jersey has requirements that our grantees need to comply with, and they are all explained in tab 3 of your grant manual. These requirements can be somewhat nuanced and complex, so it's really important that your CFO reviews tab 3 of your grant manual in depth to familiarize yourself with the requirements. One of those requirements is the audit requirement. If your organization receives more than $100,000 in state and/or federal grants in any given fiscal year, you'll be required to submit an audit. Even if your New Jersey Historic Trust grant is less than $100,000, your organization may be receiving grants from other federal or state entities in a single fiscal year. If those amounts combined exceed $100,000, you will be required to submit an audit. And audit costs are not reimbursable expenses, so your organization will have to budget for the cost of the audit outside of your project. Our grants also have an affirmative action requirement. Our grantees, their consultants, and contractors are required to comply with the state of New Jersey's affirmative action laws. It's especially important that you have the non-discrimination language and policy in any proposals or contracts related to your grant-funded activities. Your consultants are going to be required to show proof of compliance to the State Contract Compliance Unit through the Department of Treasury. So there are a few ways they can demonstrate this compliance, and more information regarding that can be found in the grant manual. If you have any specific questions about the affirmative action compliance, they can be directed to the Contract Compliance Unit. And the last requirement is prevailing wage. This only applies to our county and municipal owned properties or to nonprofits whose sites are owned by county, municipal, or state government. So that concludes this section. Are there any questions before we move on?
Looks like we do have some questions, but I think these should be asked at the end, not pertaining to your section. Unless
Okay.
anybody has some questions for Stephanie.
I think the two questions that I see are from my section. They might have come in just after I finished. So there's a question, what is the period date range that the insurance would cover? And that is the life of the grant agreement. So it'll be when it's signed in 2025 and then to when the grant agreement is officially over, which would be 2030, right? That's the life of the grant agreement. So it's 5 years. The COI Accord is something that you can submit annually, or you can submit it with a policy effective date. Sometimes they do both. They'll do it for the life of the entire thing. Oftentimes the terms and limits do change, and so you might need to submit it annually. Mostly your aggregate coverage, which is the most important thing, doesn't change, that liability coverage. And so the terms and limits that are set out there is what we accept. And if it changes, then you would let us know with a new accord.
Gary, just to add to that,
Sure.
If your project requires an easement, that easement will require insurance coverage as well. So again, as far as the length of time, I mean, if you do have an easement, then you will be carrying, liability coverage beyond the grant period of your grant. So
Right. I forgot about that. But yeah, that's absolutely true. And then Leslie Workman says, is there a way to find out our NJ Start vendor ID from your Treasury? Yep, you can find it out from Treasury. If you just use those contact resources on the slide that I had, you can either email or call or go to their website. There's plenty of help options there. And it's pretty common that, changes of the guard and people aren't the same people that they were 5 years ago when they had a grant. So it's really common to check in with Treasury to see if that contact information is all up to date and if you have an active profile in the state system. But you would do that through them. I'm having trouble seeing the last one. Something about audits, right?
Yes, I can read that for you. Linda is asking, just want to confirm that the audit is required for combining federal and state grant awards. If an additional grant was from a nonprofit, does that mean the amount needs to be included in the calculation?
Funds from an outside nonprofit don't need to be included, but your federal and state funds need to be included in your audit calculations.
Okay, great. So I will pass this along to our archaeologist, Alexis, to discuss archaeological requirements.
Hey everybody, I'm Alexis Alamy and I'm the Trust Staff Archaeologist. I'm going to briefly review the archaeological requirements of trust-funded projects, which are in place to comply with laws and regulations that protect archaeological resources. And this includes the Secretary of the Interior Standards and Guidelines for Archaeology and Historic Preservation, as well as the New Jersey Register of Historic Places Act. So to comply with the laws, regulations, and standards that are required in association with trust funding, project impacts to known or potential archaeological resources are required to be considered. Examples of projects that have required archaeological consideration in the past include construction or expansion of existing below-ground utilities, site grading, construction or expansion of parking lots, sidewalks, and landscaping, construction of ADA-compliant improvements such as exterior ramps, removal or installation of footings, exterior foundation work, drainage-related improvements, improvements to basements, and a whole variety of other activities. The advanced consideration of archaeology will ultimately benefit your organization and resource. Many of you in this grant round have already taken archaeology into consideration, are aware of the requirements, and even have proposals submitted and work plans in place, which is great news. If you haven't yet considered the potential archaeological component of your project, or if you have any specific project-related questions, you can always reach out to your program officer and myself. And archaeological requirements will also be included in your D1 scope of work that Stephanie described earlier. So in any case, we'll work together to identify an appropriate solution. And those solutions might consist of any of those that you can see on screen here. So shown here is a very general outline of the broad goals of each level of survey, but keep in mind that archaeology may need to be completed in phases. So this is why it's beneficial to ensure archaeology is included in estimates not only for cost, but also regarding project and construction timelines. So for example, you may have had a phase 1 survey completed already, but the recommendation from that work may be that additional survey is undertaken. So if you've had archaeological surveys completed on your site in the past, please be sure to review the resulting reports carefully for guidance regarding appropriate steps. And we encourage you to share those reports with us as well. I'd also like to take a moment to emphasize that archaeological monitoring is not the same as phased investigation. Archaeological monitoring is the observation of ground disturbing activity by a qualified professional archaeologist during construction, where phased investigation is the advanced completion of survey before construction starts. In most cases, some level of phased investigation will be required if this applies to your project. The choice to undertake a program of monitoring typically requires that some level of phased survey has been completed previously, but in any case, it must be approved by the trust in advance. And additionally, projects where monitoring have been approved will require the advanced submission of a monitoring protocol to the trust for review, as well as for later distribution with the full project team. But as always, please reach out if you have any questions. So what is required if archaeology is a component of your project? If it's required and you haven't done so already, your next step should be to select a qualified professional archaeologist and involve them in your project early on. After meeting with them to discuss the project, you should solicit a proposal from them which describes the planned archaeological approach. Additionally, the trust must be provided a work plan for review prior to proceeding with the investigation. The proposal and the work plan may be submitted simultaneously or in stages, but after being approved, archaeology should begin, and the resulting report must be submitted to the trust for review prior to construction starting. So the goal here is to determine whether the proposed project will affect archaeological resources, and if the answer is yes, how that can be avoided or those effects mitigated. The trust will submit final approved reports to the Historic Preservation Office on your behalf. You should note that from a construction timing perspective, you'll want to plan that phased investigation if it's required, so that it's been completed well before construction is scheduled to start. This is to ensure time for completion of the investigation itself, submission and review of the report, and then notice to proceed with ground disturbing activity. The last thing anyone wants is for construction to start and then stop, or for work to be completed that's ultimately not in compliance with the standards and therefore not eligible for reimbursement. So please, if ground disturbing activity is a component of your project, start to think about archaeology as soon as possible to avoid future delays or impacts to the project budget. And we have a variety of fact sheets available on the Trust website at the link shown here, which answer frequently asked questions, outline survey and reporting requirements, and offer guidelines related to the preparation of the archaeological monitoring protocols I mentioned earlier. That last fact sheet regarding monitoring protocols is new this year, so please feel free to take a look at it if it's applicable to your project. And I point these out for convenience and for your reference, but as always, we're always happy to meet with you to discuss your project in more detail. And I also want to take a moment to remind you that you might consider working with your archaeological team to identify whether undertaking a program of public archaeology might be a good fit for your project. Taking the opportunity to share the archaeology on your property with the people who visit it and love it can serve as an excellent avenue for increasing public engagement at your site. We've seen a number of successful public archaeology projects here at the Trust that have resulted in the collection of interesting data, as well as increased site visitation. And depending on the scope of the archaeological investigation you'll be undertaking, archaeology can be used as a training opportunity as well, which could allow for a collaboration with local professional archaeologists and universities to build mutually beneficial partnerships. And whether public archaeology becomes a component of your project or not, undertaking an archaeological investigation will provide new insight into your site's history and add to your understanding of its use and development over time. So it's an important component of historic preservation and site stewardship, and we encourage you to take full advantage of its information potential. Are there any questions specific to archaeology? Don't see any.
Like we don't have any so far.
If you think
have
of
any
anything,
questions, type them away.
Yep, let us know or give us a call. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Shannon, who will be reviewing how to administer your active grant.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Alexis. Like Alexis said, my name is Shannon, and I'm going to be walking you through administering an active grant. So before we begin, I just want to note that everything that's covered in this section of the PowerPoint can be found in Chapter 4 of your grant manual. So when you're administering an active grant, one of the key things that can help your project move along smoothly is communication with your program officer. Whether it's the early stages before a project even begins, during the design process, or even during construction, I cannot stress enough how much good communication, or the lack thereof, can impact your project. Some things that you'll need to send along to the trust leading up to construction include the following: one hard copy and one digital copy of any planning documents funded by this grant. So that's when applicable. Sometimes we'll have grantees that will complete, a preservation plan or an archaeological assessment as a part of their construction work under their non-construction costs. So we would require review as well as final copies of those reports. Any construction drawings and specifications, both throughout the drafting process as well as final versions. All draft contractor pre-qualification and bidding forms, submitted contractor pre-qualification forms, and accepted bids. If you haven't selected a consultant yet, you do need to provide the trust with any sufficient documentation on the consultant for us to determine if they meet the federal qualification standards. During construction, you should notify your program officer of any meetings. We do try to attend as many meetings as we can, especially if you tell us in advance that something important is being discussed at a particular meeting. If we can't attend, however, we do read any meeting minutes to get a sense of any project updates. Now, that being said, whether we are in attendance at the meetings or not, we do ask for copies of the minutes to review. The grantee and the consultant should also be communicating with your assigned program officer if there are any changes to the approved project, because no changes or alterations can be made unless it's approved by the trust and determined to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. You, as the grantee, are responsible for communication with the trust. Effective and constant communication allows for us to work together to accomplish the goals of your grant-funded project. One other way you'll be communicating with us is through quarterly reporting. You're responsible for submitting this report on or by the dates that you'll see on the slide. So that's going to be 4 reports in total, and that'll occur throughout the lifetime of your grant. That first quarterly report is the most important because it sets a baseline for your project. All the details of what needs to be included in your quarterly report can be found in both your grant manual as well as your executed grant agreement once you have that in hand. If you're looking for the quarterly reporting forms in your executed grant agreement, they start on page C1, which you see an example of here on the slide. You'll follow the checklist at the top of the page to ensure that you have all the required information, such as the current project status, your project narrative description, a team list, so everyone that's working on the project, current project schedule, and certification that the report is accurately completed to the best of your ability. You'll also include any submissions that you may have at the time of the report. If there's no reimbursement request, you can submit the report via email. If a reimbursement is being requested with the report, we do ask that you send it via postal delivery because we do require an original signature for the payment voucher. If your project is at a lull and you have no activity to report, we do ask that you still fill out a quick report and send it to us via email just so we know what's going on. This will help keep an open chain of communication between you and your program officer. So you can begin requesting reimbursements once you have a fully executed grant agreement in hand. Your project sign, which I'll talk about in a little bit, has been installed, and photo documentation has been submitted to the trust, and your easement, if it's required, has been recorded within your county. Easements are only required for nonprofit-owned resources receiving grants of more than $50,000. So if you are a nonprofit, but your resource is owned by the municipality or the county, you would not be subjected to an easement. Each request for reimbursement must include both an invoice and matching proof of payment from your financial institution, such as a canceled check or bank statement, for every invoice that you're requesting reimbursement for. So for example, if you're submitting 5 invoices for reimbursement, you should have proof of payment for all 5 invoices. If you're in active construction, your request should include any additional documentation not already submitted, such as meeting minutes, progress photos, or any change orders. The most important form in your reimbursement request is your payment voucher. We cannot process your reimbursement without it, so quadruple check your request before mailing it to make sure that first and foremost you included it, and then second that you filled it out correctly. The image you see on the slide is an example of what that payment voucher looks like. If you copy the voucher included in your executed grant agreement, some of the information, such as your project number and name, will already be filled out for you. As I mentioned before, we do require the original ink signature of your designated CFO or treasurer. Payment is dispersed after fiscal review. This can take anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks after the receipt of a fully complete reimbursement package. Registering for direct deposit payments through the state's ACH system, as Carrie mentioned earlier, can help expedite the payment process, so we highly recommend doing that if you're able to. So something that's important to note is the amount of funds you receive in your reimbursement request are not going to be equal to the total cost of the invoices you submitted. This is because we hold a retainage on every reimbursement. Since our grants require a match, we use a multiplier to signify the portion of the project that's your grant award. The multipliers we use are 0.57 for our capital level 1 grants and 0.475 for our capital levels 2 and 3. What you'll notice is that these multipliers are a little less than that 60% award for Cap 1 and 50% award for Cap 2 and 3. That reflects the retainage we hold on every reimbursement. For example, if you have a capital level 2 grant and you spent $30,000 in this period, you would only receive a reimbursement of $14,250, which is a little less than half of the cost for your period. You will collect the retainage upon the closeout of your project, which my colleague will talk about in a little more detail later. As you progress through your project, there will be a varied amount of work product that's necessary for us to review. It could be anything from a preservation plan or archaeology report to active construction drawings. Regardless of what it is, we do ask that you submit both drafts and final versions for us to review so that we can ensure everything meets the standards and that any comments we may have provided on draft work were addressed. In addition to the review of work products, we also require that you submit all pre-qualification and bid packages for review so we can ensure that everything follows our requirements as well as any state requirements. So Stephanie mentioned earlier that 2 costs that you'll see in your D1 spreadsheet are for signage. We do have 2 different types of signage that are required for your project. The first, which was mentioned before, was your project sign. This is your temporary sign that's displayed during the construction period of the project. That's the top image that you see on the slide. If you're receiving another grant that has construction sign requirements, please let us know. Your program officer will work with you to help you find a balance between the different requirements so that you don't have to make 6 signs to meet all of the different grants that you have. We also require a permanent sign upon the completion of the project. This is only required for projects that received grants of more than $50,000. This can be in the form of a bronze marker or a plaque, but we've also had grantees incorporate the information we require for the sign into an interpretive sign. If none of those options sound right for your resource, please reach out to your program officer and they can help you find a solution that meets all of our acknowledgement requirements. The wording that you see on the screen is part of that required information needed for your permanent sign. This is kept general and non-inclusive of years of funding so that if you are awarded another capital grant in the future, you won't have to have a new permanent sign made. All dimensions, details, and requirements for both of the project sign and permanent sign can be found in your grant manual on our website. As I mentioned earlier, any resources owned by a nonprofit with a grant award greater than $50,000 will be required to have a term easement. Our term easements are a legal agreement that provides protection to the historic resource and to our investment for a specific length of time. The length of your easement will depend upon your grant award. So as you can see on the screen, grant awards of $50,001 to $100,000 will have a term of 15 years on their easement. Awards of $101,000 to $450,000 will have a 20-year easement. And then awards of $450,000 or more will have a 30-year easement. That easement will go into effect upon the closeout of your grant. If you already have an easement with us because you're a returning grantee, your easement term will be amended to reflect the dates of your newest grants agreement expiration. Any new features that were not previously protected in your previous easement will also be added to this new easement. Before construction can begin on your project, we require the pre-qualification of contractors for all projects. This process ensures that any contractor bidding on your project is qualified to complete the work required of them. If you are a government entity, your pre-qualification and bidding process must be coordinated with DCA's Division of Local Government Services. If you're a nonprofit, but your building is owned by a government entity, so that's owned by either state or county or your municipality, you are required to coordinate with said government entity to determine how to proceed with the pre-qualification and bidding process. All municipalities and nonprofits leasing municipally owned resources must publicly advertise for pre-qualifications. However, even if you're not required to publicly advertise, we highly recommend that you do so in order to increase your pool of prospective bidders. The entire pre-qualification and bidding process is outlined in your grant manual and includes information about advertising requirements, required information that must be included in the pre-qualification forms, as well as examples and templates for the pre-qualification and bidding forms themselves. The pre-qualification and bidding process has many steps to it, so please make sure you're having conversations with your program officer before you begin this process. So as you can probably guess, the pre-qualification process and bidding, especially for government-owned resources, is pretty lengthy and has multiple steps to it. Initiation of pre-qualification by the grantee to the award of contract may take at least 4 to 5 months, so please keep that in mind as you're moving towards this stage of your project. On the screen, you'll see a general timeline of key events for both government entities and nonprofits. And just a reminder, if your resource is owned by a government entity, you will have to work closely with your municipality during the pre-qualification and bidding process to ensure that you're following state law. Sometimes there are situations that arise that may require you to amend your grant agreement. Some reasons may include changes to the project schedule, changes to the scope of work, or even a change in consultant or contractor. Your attachment D2, or the request for major change, is included in your executed grant agreement. All requests should be completed before the end of the work period or grant agreement deadline. Once submitted, they are reviewed by our Grants and Loans Committee, and if approved, they'll be forwarded to our full board for final approval and vote. Before requesting any major change, make sure you're speaking with your program officer so that they're aware of what's going on and they can assist you in the process. Requests for major change are not always approved, so make sure you have all necessary documentation and support for your request. This does include any extension requests for your work period and/or agreement expiration date. Even if you're submitting an extension request, please make sure you fill out our D2 form and send it to your program officer. Now, there are times when delays are caused by circumstances beyond our control, so to the fullest extent possible, we're going to ask that you do try to stay with your project schedule, since getting an extension for your grant agreement is not guaranteed. The Trust Grants and Loans Committee will not automatically grant an extension. It will have to be fully justified. General terms and conditions of the grant agreement are non-negotiable. And before I turn it over, I do see that there are 2 questions. So the first one, do nonprofits of a state-owned site need to have an easement? No, since your site is on state land, it's subject to state review of before any work is done in general. So no, you don't have to have an easement for that type of property. We pay electronically rather than by check. What documentation is required? So as long as you provide us with some form of documentation directly from your bank, whether that's a statement that you've highlighted very specifically exactly what that payment went towards, we would look for that. Carrie, do you have anything to add to what they would need for that?
Nope, just that it's really important that it's from the financial institution and that it shows the completed transaction. Sometimes these statements come across with different information, and we just need to be able to identify that it's a statement from your bank and that it has an official closeout transaction number that we could trace if we were audited.
And if there are no more questions at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk about closing out the grant.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer. We will now talk about closing out our grant. So while it may be some time before anyone here actually closes out their grant, it's still important now to go through the process so that you will be well prepared at the time of project closing. First, please note that project closeout can only occur after the trust has reviewed and approved all work to date. And the closeout process is very important because you will not receive the remaining balance of your grant until you submit the completed closeout paperwork. And let me repeat, you will not receive the remaining balance of your grant until your closeout paperwork is submitted and approved by the trust. In order to close out your capital grant, you will need to complete the C2 form included with your grant agreement. The C2 form features two parts. One part is the retainage reimbursement form, as Shannon just discussed. The second part is the final performance report. Both parts of the form need to be completed in order to close out your grant, so please follow the itemized checklist on this form. And to have a complete reimbursement request, you must submit copies of all invoices and canceled checks or proof of payments that were not part of your other reimbursement request. If you submitted all invoices and canceled checks at this point, then remember that you are still due your retainage fee, so you will need to fill this form out regardless. We also need a payment voucher that is also included with your grant agreement, and this form must be signed with an original signature from your CFO. As for the final performance report, here is a list of items it must include to properly close out your capital grant. First, it is the narrative that explains how the project went. We also request before and after photos of the project. A photo of the permanent plaque, if your grant is in excess of $50,000, should also be included. Employment figures from consultants and contractors that will provide information about how many tradespeople and how many professionals have worked on your project must be included. We also ask if there is a revised scope of work. That includes information such as unexpected work items, the reduction of scope of work if there is cost overruns, for example, or even the addition of other work if the project comes in below budget. But please keep in mind that the revised scope of work should not be a surprise to your program officer. Please keep your program officer updated with all scope changes. In addition, the final report will include the final total project costs as well as built drawings. Please let your contractor know now or as soon as you are able that they will need to provide these as-built drawings. And finally, we ask for a closeout letter from your consultant certifying that your project is complete. And just so everyone is aware, you can submit these items throughout the work period. You do not need to wait until the very end to submit everything, but please make sure that everything reflects the final result of your project. And once everything is submitted and approved, your program officer will then be able to file the closeout paperwork for the disbursement of your remaining grant balance and/or the retainage fee to close out the grant. If you want more information about the closeout process, please see Chapter 4 of your grant manual, which has great descriptions about the information required on the closeout forms. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns, please call or email us. Now briefly for multi-phase projects, All subsequent capital phases are contingent upon the completion or substantial completion of the current capital phase. Let your program officer know when this completion date is approaching so that the next chunk of funding is included in the upcoming appropriations bill. Also to note is that we do require a new grant agreement for the next proposed phase of work. While you are able to continue work during this process, we will not be able to provide a reimbursement until we have fully executed grant agreement for the next phase. If you do continue to work, please keep your trust staff person in the loop to make sure that your work is meeting the standards and are allowable expenses. Now, are there any questions?
It looks like we have a question from Bernadette. Does grant funding from county sources, including re-grant funding from the state, count towards the requirement for an audit?
So the answer to that is, as I understand it, and Glenn, you might have a different perspective, but as I understand it, it's if the state gives the county money and they re-grant it, the responsibility of the audit to the state falls on the county. They have to account for how they re-granted it. So we're talking about audits that are under our mandate that are direct state funds, direct federal funds that need to be accounted for in a fiscal year.
And correct me, Carrie, if I'm wrong, notices go out if an audit is due from a nonprofit. I mean, they'll receive a notification. Is that not true?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. We send out basically an Excel spreadsheet asking you to itemize what state and federal funds you have been dispersed to you in a single fiscal year. But again, that doesn't include how the county has chosen to disperse state funds.
No, I agree with you as far as, I mean, that would be the county's responsibility for that because they got the grant originally.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are no more questions, then I'm going to hand things over to Ashley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my name is Ashley Parker. I'm a program officer here at the Trust and the Heritage Tourism Coordinator. So many of you are still tuned in, so I want to begin by saying thank you. And today I will be going over how publicity can play an important role in your project. So publicity helps maintain visibility of your project and your organization during the preservation campaign. It can also increase attendance and/or membership for programs and activities, and can also attract new funding support and additional resources. Publicizing your project also promotes and raises awareness of history and historic preservation in New Jersey, which helps ensure ongoing funding for historic preservation. Some good publicity opportunities are grant award announcements and check presentations, project milestones such as a groundbreaking or ribbon cutting ceremony, tours, special events, or profiles of your volunteers, staff, or special craftsmen, or of course, letters to your legislatures and representatives. These opportunities can be achieved by news or journal articles about your project, social media posts, or special televised news coverage. If you're interested in coordinating a check presentation or a grant award announcement, please contact your program officer directly. We have a large check here in our office for presentations that look great in photos. Additionally, your site may also be eligible for inclusion on Journey Through Jersey, the state's go-to website for all things heritage tourism that was launched by the Trust in 2017. The website features heritage tourism destinations throughout the state in addition to annual events, educational resources, blog posts, and travel itineraries, which are also featured on Journey Through Jersey's Facebook and Instagram. We also host unique educational opportunities for Journey Through Jersey site managers. So for the past couple of years, 10 Journey Through Jersey participants received complimentary registration to the New Jersey Conference on Tourism. We highly encourage you to nominate your visitor-ready site. Journey Through Jersey will publicize your resource for free. You will receive a welcome packet upon joining that includes a window decal and postcard with a QR code that links visitors to the website. We only ask that if you are a participating resource, that you include the Journey Through Jersey logo with a link to the website on your organization's website. If you would like to learn more about Journey Through Jersey, would like to be featured, or are interested in writing a blog post, please contact me directly. My contact information can be found at the end of this presentation and on the Trust website. So help us help you promote your project by staying in touch with us. The Trust is active on Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We encourage you to tag us in posts, send us news coverage, progress reports, events, or any other content that you would like us to share. There are no guarantees, but we do try to post as much as we can. We also kindly ask that you reshare our posts and link to our website in order to help us raise awareness about funding opportunities and historic preservation in New Jersey. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation back over to my colleague, Olivia, to address any additional questions you may have.
Hey everyone, it's Olivia again. It looks like we have another question to round us out. Linda asks, I would like to confirm that even if the county owns the property, we as the grantee are responsible for paying the vendors for work completed and submitting the paperwork for reimbursement?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that our grant is with you as the grantee. We could only send it legislatively. It could only go to you. However, if the county is a partner in this and are making payments, that's fine, but you're going to have to work that out between you and the county. So if the canceled checks or payments are from them, that could also be submitted as long as it's going with the right invoices back to us. But we can only pay you. We cannot pay the county. Any other questions at this time?
So far, we don't have any. We can take a moment if anyone has. Oh, some pouring in. Let's go. Okay. Daniel is asking, if your CFO leaves during the construction process, what is the procedure for approved replacement?
Yeah, this happens sometimes. So what you would want to do is contact your program officer and let them know that there's been a change in who signed the certificate of accounting adequacy, financial adequacy, and just let them know who that is. You might be asked to resubmit that document if there is a significant change, but you would start with contacting your PO to let them know that the name on the payment voucher is no longer accurate.
Yeah, some sort of official notification back to the trust, whether it's on your letterhead or what, just saying that this is a new person, so that could go into your project file.
Yeah. As a municipality, what should be entered as the NJ Start ID? Start with your EIN, and if you don't have, municipalities are often in the state system under the primary EIN and then several sub numbers afterwards. So start with your regular EIN, see what the information looks like, and then if you need to adjust it, contact the Treasury information that I gave you at NJ Start, and they can help you update a profile. But to initially look it up, you would go in with your EIN.
Any other questions at this time? Again, all of the trust staff is available via email or phone. If anything pops up that you want to ask any questions, please reach out to them. It's never a problem to ask us a question. We'd rather hopefully answer a quick, easy question, then we're never bothered by it. So please do reach out to your program officer if you have questions. During this webinar, I've actually been checking to see if the governor signed anything. He's actually signed 2 bills, but unfortunately, neither one was ours. But we are expecting this quite soon. We will let you know as soon as he does sign the bills. If there are no other questions at this time, again, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. I'll hold off on that.
All right. Looks like we have a question from Mark. If time permits, it would be great to hear more about the easement requirement. In quickly perusing the section at the back of the packet, it seems significant.
Sure. So easements are required for properties owned by nonprofits that have grant awards over $50,000. If the grant award is between, correct me if I'm wrong, Glenn, $50,000 to $150,000, it's 15 years. 150 to 450,000, it's 20 years, and anything over 450,000 is 30 years.
Yeah.
And the easement is meant to protect the features that your scope of work covers. So
in your case, Mark, I mean, you're dealing with an exterior roof and some exterior stuff. So the easement in this case will cover the exterior of your property. And again, anything that you do needs to meet the Secretary of Interior standards. So if you wanted to put an addition on, which I don't think you would in your case, knowing your building. But again, we just need to make sure that meets the standards. So there's a process of getting approval from the trust, submitting a request for approval. And annually, we'll ask that you submit basically an annual report just telling us if anything's been done to the building, providing current photographs to show that the building is still standing and in good condition. And that will continue for the length of that easement. But again, if there's a very specific question, we could talk about that offline too. But generally, what your grant is covering, your easement will be covering too. So if it's interior restoration, the easement's covering interior. If it's both, then it's both. But bare minimum, actually, it will be basically the building and the property, at least immediately surrounding that property, your building.
All right, we have a couple of questions. Looks like we have some POs typing answers. Daniel asks, when will program officers be assigned? I believe we are assigned.
Yeah, I think the award letters on the bottom, didn't they note the program officer? So where it said, please contact so-and-so with any questions, that will be your program officer.
That and the email that was sent with the details for today's grantee workshop also copied the program officer on that email. So you already established a chain of communication with them.
And we have another question from Leslie. Oh, looks like it was answered. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Ashley.
Well, again, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. A lot of great questions. We have a lot of great projects. I mean, I know we're all excited to start seeing construction started. So again, keep us all informed of that. And we will let you know as soon as the governor signs the legislation. So again, congratulations on your grant, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you all.